Good morning, South by Southwest. My name is Maria Paula. I am an actress, an author, and a researcher with a master's degree in mental health. For over 3 decades, I have been dedicated into designing a society wired for peace, a mission that led me to be recognized as Peace Ambassador of Brazil. It is a great honor to be here in this stage of South by Southwest today, sharing this stage with a woman whose courage and resilience had changed the world. She is not only a Nobel Peace Laureate, but also a global voice for survivors of human trafficking and genocide. She is truly a big inspiration for every woman on planet. Please welcome with me the beautiful, extraordinary Nadia Murad.
Thank you.
Nadia, we are going to, for context, show them a little video of yourself so that they can know you better.
British officials in northern Iraq report that fighters of the Islamic militant group ISIS have carried out a massacre.
In between explosives laid by ISIS, entire sections of the city are destroyed.
We can see the people below, trapped on Sinjar Mountain.
ISIS soldiers would brag about conquering Yazidi women and wiping their religion from the face of the earth.
When I first started telling my story and talking about conflict-related sexual violence, there was not much attention about this issue that is happening in all the wars that are taking place right now as we speak. In 2014, I was preparing for my last year of high school. I witnessed a genocide, the killing of my family members, and the brutality of being held captive as a sex slave. Nadia's Initiative is a non-profit organization I founded to unite governments, grassroots organizers to raise awareness about conflict-related sexual violence, support survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable, and to rebuild post-conflict regions. I dedicate this award to all the young women like me who were raised in vulnerable communities by strong women.
I wish I had the strength of Nadia. Having every reason to withdraw from the world, you summoned the courage to stand up and say, no, no.
She became a global voice for justice and dignity and a sense of common humanity.
Nobel Peace Prize is recognizing efforts to end sexual violence during wartime. It was awarded to Dr. Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad.
I think it is so important that we find those women who their voices are not heard. We can't bring about change without working with them.
Yay, let's welcome this outstanding lady. Nadia, let's start with the strength that you came with to overcome such strong history. Looking back, what was the single moment that defied your survival struggle and helped you to fight for justice instead of succumbing to despair?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here and for your time. I'm so honored to be here. You know, I was one of more than 6,000 women and children that were taken into sexual slavery. Everyone in my family member, my sisters-in-law, my nieces, my cousins were all taken into captivity. And the moment I survived, I also felt that my survival carried with it a responsibility. Because when you are one of these women that you were able to escape one of the most dangerous group of the recent history, I felt responsible immediately after I passed the last checkpoint of ISIS. And from that moment, I wanted to share the stories of so many women and girls that were left behind, and women that I grew up with, women that I cared so much about, but also realizing and knowing what they were going through, where their ISIS publicly opened markets, buying and selling women all around Iraq and Syria. And they used, different platforms like Telegram, YouTube, and Facebook. So for me, it was really important to use that opportunity to not talk about my story, but the stories of so many women and girls that I knew what they were going through. And I remember when I was trying to share my story, I was also displaced in a camp with more than 12,000 people inside my own country, because my home was still under ISIS control, and my community, those who survived, were all displaced. And it was so hard to share a story like this, because rape is stigmatized, even when you are forced into that situation. And especially in countries like Iraq, publicly talking about rape and violence against women, it was dangerous. There was so much shame and stigma attached to it. But I couldn't just be silent, because I knew what was going on. And I remember one moment that was so important to me when the 60 Minutes came to Iraq looking for survivors to interview them. And my brother said, they came to me, and I didn't know. I grew up in a very small, remote village. It was my first time meeting, journalists, learning about the UN and the international community. And when they were looking for survivors, and they came to me, and they said, if you share your story, there will be so many millions of people, and especially in the US, that will learn about your story. And I told my brother, I think this is my moment to share. But we decided to cover my face, because my loved ones were in captivity, and it was so risky to share my face. And also to point something out, that a lot of these ISIS members were our neighbors, people who knew me and my family and my community. So it was important to be careful about my loved ones in captivity. And I remember sharing this story and covering my face. And the second I left that interview, I just realized that my face and my voice need to be together, and I cannot share this story without also showing my face.
Yeah, when you say the stigma, it resonates with me, because it's something that happens all over the world. Like in Brazil, it's a completely different context, but still women that have been raised have been blamed for that and stigmatized, and have been feeling scared and ashamed of sharing their stories. So it doesn't matter what the circumstances. I guess the common ground for us women is the same. So having you being courageous enough to, show your face and give your voice into bringing awareness for that is really major in every context. Our country, Brazil, is a very, the culture is very, very macho-oriented, all the Latin America. So although we are not in a war conflict, but we understand everything that you're saying now as women. So that brings me to the next question. How do you think that women can back up each other And because what I see from your journey, having Amal Clooney as your lawyer might have helped you not only to, to be out there and having the attention of the world, but also to have another woman that is, relating to that, understanding you. So how would you think that this sisterhood or this, female backing up to each other shaped your trajectory?
Well, I think it's so important to know that this is not just a fight for women. We need men too, because it's their sisters, their daughters, their mothers and cousins, and we need men in this fight. And I have been, it has been so amazing working with a lot of men, from Dr. Denis Mukwege that I shared Nobel with, who has been working in Congo for over 2 decades, helping survivors of rape, getting support from world leaders like President Macron. And I think it's so important to know that this is not just a women's fight. We need everyone in this fight to make sure that we end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. We need to talk about it in our homes, schools, and workplaces. But it's also, for someone like me, I was very young when it happened to me, and my mother was killed, and my sisters were also taken into captivity and were survivors. So I didn't have that female support, I would say, like in the family. And it was important to find people that I could trust with my story, surrounding myself with the right people. And I would say Amal is one of the many examples. She has been my lawyer since it's been almost 8 years, and she always inspires me. The work that she is doing, not only with Yazidis, but with many other communities and their organization, the Clooney Foundation for Justice. I am always inspired. And one thing that I really appreciate about Amal's support is that when I first met her, I couldn't even introduce myself in English. It's not my language, and I learned English. I would say I'm still learning, but since that moment, she has always, she recognized my full humanity. She never treated me as a victim or as a story or as a case. And that is really important when we find the right people. You could have so much support and people coming to you and saying, you're doing great and this work, but finding, your people that you trust them, that recognize your full humanity and treat you as a full person and not just that specific part of your story has been really amazing. And I do, think that we need more and more support in this fight against rape and violence against women, not only from women, but also from men.
From everyone. I totally agree with you. And when you mentioned like Macron and some men that have helped you, and we saw pictures of you with the Pope and with presidents and, people who are very powerful. And I'm sure that it's very, very important to have your voice heard. But what do you think that actually is changing? Is really changing? Is these people really doing something? Or you get frustrated of being out there, sharing your story, seeing all those presidents talking about it, and then at the end, the men who have been doing the perpetrators are still doing it, and pretty much nothing is happening. What's the real picture?
I believe we have seen a progress. In 2014, when, for example, ISIS carried this campaign, there was a lot of attention from the world leaders and media on how ISIS was taking control. So on a really they were like taking control of big parts of Iraq and Syria. There was a lot of attention on how many lives were lost, the destruction, but very little attention on this war crime, rape as a war crime. And after many survivors shared their stories, and we were able to go and at the UN talk to media, I realized that for example, 3 years ago when the war started in Ukraine, there were also a lot of cases of rape, and I was in Ukraine and I met many of survivors there. But at least the media and the world were able to quickly recognize that. And that is important to make sure that right now when we are talking about the war in Sudan, we talk about rape and how it's being used. And I have met some activists from Sudan who have shared, some devastating stories of women being raped. And, how, for example, right now in Sudan, these armed groups are specifically targeting women of reproductive age from like 12 to 35 to make sure that they're not just raping them, but that are impregnating them.
Oh
to leave them with a permanent mark. And it happened to the Yazidi community too, when ISIS forced kids to bury their children. So that is something that we hear more from more leaders talking about it. That is really important. But at the end of the day, I think it's all because of many brave survivors who have shared their stories over and over again. Sometimes we don't see the results immediately, but it's so important to go back and knock on these doors over and over again. It doesn't have to, not only politicians, but also religious leaders, activists, students, media. It's important.
That brings another very polemic subject, which is abortion. And when we talk about this, in these cases, this is not abortion. This is the interruption of some crime. So we see right now all over the world, people addressing, subjects. They are very polemic and very difficult to understand, of course. But when you say that it's like deliberately as a war weapon, not just the sexual abuse of women, but also the impregnating them in order to have, children, and the trauma, the generation trauma keeps reproducing itself. How do you think that the policymakers could intervene and help? You said that the media is helping, talking about it. But we know that in different areas of the world, different policies are being addressed. What do you think that would really help in order to address such problems?
I mean, it is something that I've been focused on from the very beginning, is justice and accountability. Because a lot of these perpetrators who commit these crimes, they get away. They've got impunity and they go to a different place and commit the same crime. But they're not afraid of being killed in these conflicts and when they commit these crimes. But what they're afraid most of it is facing a survivor in the courtroom and being able to hold them accountable when you have all the evidence, when you have survivors' testimonies and survivors, ready to share their stories. The only way you can send a clear message to ISIS and like-minded groups is when you publicly hold them accountable. That if you have to think twice before abusing women, before using women's bodies to fuel your wars and conflict. So we have been focused a lot on justice and accountability. Unfortunately, the process is very slow. I always say that I have lost more members of my family than the members of ISIS fighters have been held accountable in the past 11 years, but at least there are countries like Germany who are taking the lead, that have publicly, with the support of survivors, hold more than three ISIS members accountable. And there are other cases that we are working on it right now in Sweden, in the Netherlands, but also in Iraq, as a lot of ISIS members were from there. So it is really important to know that when we have all this evidence and we have survivors' support, and if we really want to end sexual violence in conflict, then we have to focus on accountability. But I must say that the political will, it's not that what I expected. There is just very little political will to hold them accountable.
When you turned yourself into an activist and you received so many, like the Nobel Prize, Peace Nobel Prize, and different awards, that in one hand is great because it brings the subject into, you know, the front pages of every journal, every newspaper all over the world. But on the other hand, it must be tricky for you to be always in this, you know, showing your face and your voice, and for something that hurts so much. How is that in a human perspective? Like for you, how do you deal with that emotionally, and how do you keep your mental health?
I mean, this is not something that I grew up wanting to do. I never, as I said, before 2014, I never heard of the UN. I never met a journalist in my life before 2014, even though Iraq is being in wars for decades now, and I witnessed some of them. But growing up in a small remote village and being the youngest of 11 and was raised by a single mother and the first one in my family to attend high school, I felt so special in my family and in the village. But I always wanted to open a beauty salon, hair and makeup. That was something that I was looking forward to do it because there were no beauty salons in the village. And I really wanted to do something and give something to women like my mom who worked so hard every day to bring them together, give them a space where we could be together, share stories. And I was very much focused on that. I would collect, you know, photos of brides and keep them and say, you know, one day I will put it in my salon. And I was not able.
May I interrupt you because I cannot believe you're saying that. I'm going to break the protocol. Can you give me that book? We are launching a book that it's women's stories, and I would like to give it to you. Unfortunately, it's in Portuguese. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to read. But in this book, there are many women from all over the world showing their stories. And I am one of them. And in my story, I start, really, I'm not joking, you're going to read it one day when it's in English, or I start saying, when I was a child, I wish I would be a hairdresser. And every time my mom's friends would come to our place, I would make up and do beautiful things in their hairs because I knew that feeling good made that women bring up a light and cheerful atmosphere in the house. And it's like, when you said it, I just couldn't believe. It's like you see, so many different contexts, different words, different trajectories, and still so much in common.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that for me, it was really bringing women together, giving them a space. And a lot of you are familiar with what Taliban is doing, you know, in Afghanistan. And actually, a year ago, they closed all the beauty salons. Not because they're afraid that women will go and wear makeup. They know you can wear makeup at home. But they were so afraid of these spaces that are dedicated to women, that women will come and share stories and something will happen come out from those. So all the beauty salons are closed. And another thing that we do, for example, I co-founded the Global Survivors Fund with my friend, Dr. Dennis Mukwege, where we advocate for reparations for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and we provide and from reparations to survivors. But even with reparations, a lot of survivors cannot take financial support, right? Because there is so much stigma attached to it. Oh, you're being paid for being raped. But there are different forms of, for example, of reparations that they ask when we work with them. And some of them go to beauty salons to get psychological support so that their families, they think that they're going to a beauty salon, but they're where they are receiving actually psychological support. So the power of these beauty salons in countries and small villages and towns like where I came from, it's really so important, and not about changing someone's physical appearance. It's not about the hair and makeup, it is about that space.
And now you are addressing the question that I did in the beginning of women backing up women, like in these safe spaces that we create to ourselves so that we can connect and we can, really help each other. And this is so beautiful to hear, because this is wiring society for peace. We're hacking the system completely, like doing that. Like there is all the cultural crazy stuff going on. Like for you said, you can only wear makeup in the salons. Like in Brazil, you can wear a bikini in the street and it's okay. It's different. The cultural differences are humongous, but still underneath there are, the dangers and, things that happens and that can really trap women. You come from a society that women have to cover, they cannot wear makeup outside, and still you find these places where you can connect, and this is so beautiful to hear, and it's so interesting to see how humanity finds some different ways so that we can come out with solutions for the struggles we are facing. I wish to know about your dreams and your next steps and.
As I was saying, my dream was always to be a makeup artist and open a beauty salon. But right now I'm so happy with the way that I have been able to use my story and turn it into something good, helping so many other women and girls and even men that have experienced same thing that I experienced. I hope to be able to continue this work to help more women and girls, but to also make sure that we can end this war crime against so many women and girls. I think we all, and especially in these challenging times, we all have a responsibility to advocate, to work, to learn about one another, to reach out to those who their stories are untold, to make sure that we stand up for one another, shine a light on injustice. These are, this is a moment of resistance, and I think we all, have the power to do something, even if it's so small. And I'm also working. I wrote my first book, but I'm also writing a new book, and it's more about this, activism and how much, personal stories, they have so much power that when we use them and find the right people, we can really bring about change.
Tell me about your book. What's the name of the book? Can you share one little part or one story that you feel that is powerful and can enhance our awareness of what you came through?
Well, my first book is, which I think we have some copies, and hopefully we can sign some of them. It is the dearest thing to my heart, because it was hard to go back and reflect and write a book about what happened. But it was important to document and to make sure that what I experienced and so many other women was documented and shared with the world. And I titled it with The Last Girl, because I do want to be the last girl in the world with a story like mine. And in the past 10 years, I have been working as an activist, and I've traveled the world and met so many amazing people. And like you said, I have received many awards, but there is so much more work and challenges that are, people often don't see that goes into this work. It's not about just being at the UN and receiving Nobel, but everything else that went into this work before. And the journey, that some people think that, the moment you survive, that's it, you survived. But I think I'm still surviving the whole experience, the trauma and the journey. So I hope to be able to share some of my experiences, especially with the younger generation who always ask me, for an advice on how they can be also activists and change makers. And I want to say that I don't have a one answer for that question, because there's no one thing that will make you as an activist, a change maker. So it's more about that.
Yeah, it's beautiful to hear that, because it's like you're out there. Just being you is already so inspiring for us all. And to hearing your story, of course, we all have our struggles. Everyone's fighting a battle. Everyone's got its own issues to come up with, to overcome. But you really faced the extreme frontier of, facing adversity and being able to, realign yourself and being there, gorgeous, calm, beautiful, addressing such amazing content. And what advice would you give to people that are, succumbing to despair or feeling hopeless with their own difficulties?
Well, I don't blame many people who just feel that, okay, this is the end. And it's because seeing everything that is happening in the world could be overwhelming to feel hopeful and wanting to continue the work. But it is important to know that, all is not lost. And there are so many conflicts and crises that are happening. But it's also, we're all in this room because we want to learn something from one another. We want to do something. And you being here, it's a really important first step to take, that we are still eager to learn. We are still no matter what you read this morning, you still have the hope, and you are here because you want to be able to learn. That is really important. I'm always hopeful. I think even in the in those dark moments, the only thing that helped me to survive was staying hopeful. That there were so many, I was surrounded by terrorists and people who had no mercy, and people who treated me as a slave. But I always felt that, I came from a family that my brothers cared so much, and they will never have done anything like that to someone. And there must be people out there who really want to support me, who really are not, supporting ISIS. So it's really important for us to not lose hope. I know it's overwhelming, but I also hope that you can find those people from these different communities, different parts of the world that are fighting every single day and standing up against injustices and trying to fight and bring about change and peace. And
Nadia, how do you relate to religion? Because I see that you have a relationship with spirituality and you find hope, but we are talking about a specific, very like difficult issue because it's related to the religion, and it's a war that the religion is intertwined. And so how do you deal with that? Are you religious? What do you think? How do you think that the religion is setting even more fuel to the war? Or how do you deal with it? Because if you think of like Buddhism, it's like it's a religion that it's calm and quieter. But in your case, in your culture, it's like it's the nerve, very, very sensitive content. How do you deal with it?
I'm not a religious person. My mother was, but she always, she raised us all, me and my 10 siblings, to be good people, and that was the most important thing. But also, I know that religion can play a really important role in making peace. I don't think any religion, I don't believe any religion stands for war and genocide, but there are people from different religions that always try to take advantage of that. And that is why from the very beginning of my journey, I have met so many religious leaders from different religions, telling them that they have also a responsibility to advocate. They have a responsibility to stand up against those people who are using religion to achieve their own goals. And their support is so important. So I do go to them. I have good relationships with many of them because it's, as I said at the beginning, this is not, you can't really make peace by just with only working with politicians or journalists or one specific group. We need everyone, and specifically in regions in like the Middle East right now that it's a lot is happening, and we do need everyone to come and do their part. And religious leaders have a responsibility, and they also have power to stand up against those people. Yeah.
Let's dive into the woman, not the activist anymore. You said you had 11. You're the 11th child, so you have 10. Where do you live now? Where is your family? Do you see them? Do you miss them? Do you miss your culture? What was your life and what it is now?
Yeah, I was the youngest of 11. Six of my brothers were killed. My sister survived. One of them is in Australia, immigrated there, the other one in Germany. I go to Iraq once or twice a year. I can't live there, unfortunately. My home is destroyed, but we work there with survivors, and I try to go there when there is, for example, something important like every few months the UN team UNITAD that collected evidence and exhumed mass graves from my village, every time they identify people and bring them back, I try to be with the community, with survivors. And I immigrated to Germany, so I spent a lot of time in Germany, but I also studied at American University in Washington, D.C., and we have an office in D.C., and my husband is based in D.C., so I spend my time between D.C. and Stuttgart, Germany, and always try to find the opportunity to go back home to Iraq.
Yeah. When you say, I now have a different life, I live in Germany, and I go back to Iraq because I need to rescue people that are still, struggling with horrible stuff there. So how does it sound to you? Because the question is it okay? Is it calm and easy for you to relate with your memories and with your culture, or it's so traumatic that you try to, be in different cultures and have like not wearing the veil. Did you grow up wearing a veil?
No, in my religion we're not. Yeah, so
please explain, because we don't really know.
Yeah, you know, in the Yazidi religion, we are not forced to wear anything. When women like my mom get older, they wear like a white scarf that's mostly at the back of their head and not like the whole. So no, I never wore it, but I just following what you said, I don't really go to Iraq just to rescue people or the work, but it's also it's home where I grew up, and it's where
you miss it.
It's where many people it was never just ISIS. Many other groups before ISIS who always try to eradicate us from Iraq, and it's where we have been there for centuries. It's about not just about missing, home, but the thousands of years of history and culture and tradition and the language and where I grew up. So it is important to also send a message to these groups that, we can't just every time they try to eradicate us, we leave that homeland and go try to find a homeland somewhere else. It is about where I learned so many of life lessons from my mother and my community. And it is important to focus, and that has been the goal of Nadia's initiative, helping people to go back, talking to world leaders, trying to push them to invest in the homeland when people can go back and rebuild their lives and come back stronger, because at the end of the day, we are a part of that region and that country. And, at the same time, I miss home, of course, but I try to stay connected to my tradition. I spend time with my nieces and nephews where I have free time. But it's important to know that war, doesn't just kill people. It destroys families and traditions and religions forever. It's about going back right now and trying to build a life where people have lost so much. But it's also about, for me, in the past 10 years, I couldn't just focus on me as a person, as a survivor, but I'm here with you. And 11 years later, my nephew, my niece, and my sister-in-law are still missing in ISIS captivity. And the last time we heard from some of them was 7 years ago. My niece was only 4 weeks old when she was taken into captivity. And now if she's alive, she's 11 years old. So it's really important. And I hope, from these discussions, we could think about it. When the war is militarily ended, there's so much more that is still ongoing and continues to be to happen. And with the Yazidis, for example, people have moved on with what ISIS did. But today we have more than 2,800 women and children that were taken with me back then who are still missing. And of course, ISIS was defeated in 2017. But the ideology and the way that their families took these women and children and kept them until today. And we have failed them, and we have failed women in Sudan. Right now we are failing them in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in many parts of the Middle East. It's just important to know that, yes, the war was, ISIS was defeated, but how about all these people who are not just numbers, but real people who have families and people love them, and will continue the work and hope that we can work together to make sure that what happened in 2014 will never happen again to anybody else.
When you say that your niece was taken when she was a baby and that you haven't seen her again, I feel like my heart breaks when I listen to that. So our final question, because we're going to open so that everyone can join in to the conversation, would be, where does your strength come from? Do you do therapy? Do you meditate? How can you, regulate your emotions and your memories? How can you share it with us?
Yeah, I went to therapy once, and I think therapy is really important. And we in Iraq and other places we do focus a lot on psychological support for survivors. But it was not meant for me. I needed to find my purpose, and this work is my purpose. It gives me
hands-on.
hope.
You go there
every day, and being able to make something out of this story. It has given me purpose, and I do things. Of course, I have a very supportive family, and I have an amazing husband, a partner that I can share everything about what I go through, and fun things, but also difficult moments. I have focused a lot on sport since I moved to Germany. And growing up in Iraq, where sport is really not for women, I never did anything more than walking from home to school and from school to the family farm. But I've been running a lot, and it has helped me so much. That's something I don't always have time, but every time I have, a gap between meetings and something, I just go for a long run. And, simple things that really brings me peace and joy. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all you shared. It's beautiful to see sports. When you said sports, not something for women in my country, it's like, it's crazy that we can have such different, amazing outcomes waiting for us. Like something really difficult happened to you, but then still the trajectory of your life brought you to some different space where you could find beautiful surprises in your life and start through exercise, becoming more healthy, not only physically, but emotionally and mind. It's beautiful to hear. I truly thank you for being with us today. I'm sure the audience is full of questions. So let's open up for the first question, which is, what advice would you give to journalists and media professionals about how to ethically and effectively cover stories of trauma and resilience?
That's a really good question, and that is why I worked a few years ago with the UK government to create a code of conduct where journalists, prosecutors, documentarians, anyone who is interested in covering these stories can use to prepare them for these interviews, to make sure that it's called the Murad Code. And it's not like a long document, it's a short document where people can take their time and make sure that they prioritize survivors' well-being. They don't ask questions to re-traumatize them, over and over again. And making sure that survivors are aware and understand what kind of documents they signed, because this is based on what I experienced in the camps, where me and many of my fellow survivors, a lot of the times I didn't know the difference between an aid worker and a journalist. So a lot of the times our stories were taken without our consent, and sometimes we will sign on documents that were not even in our language. Survivors would say, please don't share my face, and the next day their faces will be, shown.
Exposed.
Yeah, so it's important to know that a lot of people want to cover these stories and they care about it. And sometimes they don't know how to start and where to start to make sure that they don't re-traumatize them. So this code, it's really important, and I encourage all of you to read it. It's very short, and we also have been able to push, the UN Women and others to use it in their work. A lot of organizations. We have the support of countries like Canada, for example, supporting the code. You know, when they support the code and recognize it, these countries, for example, they fund a lot of organizations and companies, and they can tell them, well, I'm supporting you, and I want to make sure that you are, you have this code, and you're able to prioritize their well-being. I remember there was a very, famous story in, I think it was in Congo or somewhere, where women were fleeing rape and war, and a journalist was, shouting and saying, anyone else here is being raped and speaks English. So of course no one would say that, and women sometimes, survivors, want to be able to really have control and not just being asked over and over again what they were wearing in that specific moment.
Beautiful. I have Meredith making a comment saying that thanking you for your bravery, for sharing your story with the world. And she's also asking if your book is available at the South by Southwest bookstore.
Thank you so much. Yes, and hopefully after this we will go there and sign some books. Yeah, so I would love to see some of you there.
Yeah. Another question is, Nadia, which war zones are you most concerned about, particularly for women, and how can we help?
I mean, all war zones are dangerous for women, and I'm concerned about all of them. But some recent stories that I have heard, and our teams have been to those two places right now, Sudan and the DRC. It's really, really bad, and I'm so worried about these two places where, especially in Sudan, many of these women have nowhere to go. In the DRC, a lot of these women have already been survivors of past conflicts. And so every war zone, it's concerning, and especially for women and girls. But there are some places where it's even more concerning because we don't know really what is happening, and there is less support in these different specific war zones. Yeah.
Yeah, just to share with you, Brazil is not in a so-called war, but every day in 6 or 8 minutes, a woman is raped, a woman is killed. So, there is, this subject speaks to everyone, and it's really a matter of creating a better mindset so that everyone can join in and change our concepts of how should we relate to each other and how should we respect each other. So it's really, there are so many aspects. There's another question here. Do you think you'll ever be able to open your beauty salon? And someone is willing to help you to open up.
I hope so. I still love doing my niece's hair and makeup and my hair and makeup, and talking to friends about it. I think it's something that ISIS was not. They failed to kill that thing inside me, that my passion for hair and beauty and just bringing women together. But I don't know when and how. But I hope that when I open it, that I will get your support and you will come over. But through my organization, we have been able to help dozens of survivors to open their own beauty salons. And that is really amazing that I couldn't open my own, but at least I'm being able to help others, which is amazing, yeah.
And what do you think is the best way to teach young kids about women's rights in the Western world, especially now that the DEI is under surge? And this is a question from Kim Karsten.
Yeah, well, in every home, in every household, it's really important to teach kids from an early age about women's rights, about in the family, making sure that they understand and respect for boys, for example, their sisters and mothers, and for girls to be able to also learn, be independent, and learn about these issues. And it is really important. But I think it's also important to do it. I always think of, when I think of Iraq, that we need better educational systems when it comes to women's rights. I went to school for 11 years, and I never knew that women can write history books. I never read a piece in school that was written about any woman, or any stories of women that have experienced, domestic violence or violence in, during war. So it's really important for us to talk about it. I was able to learn so much from my mother. She was a single mom, but for me, I also grew up with knowing a lot about honor killings in my country, that there were so many stories of women that my mom would try to tell us about them and try to share these stories, not just with me, but with my 8 brothers too, so they could also, learn about it and help us. And we have so much power, I think, to when teaching kids, and they're young and they can learn. And people like ISIS, for example, they didn't kill children and boys especially because they knew that they could brainwash them, and they did. They were able to
turn
take
themselves
them
into
soldiers, but also terrorists, and they took those boys into training camps. And another story that I learned from when I was in college, I took a class with a professor from Afghanistan, and he shared some really interesting stories. When you learn, so much from people from those countries, and he said, I know the world is just so much worried about what is happening to women and girls in Afghanistan right now. He said, but I'm just so worried about what Taliban is teaching these boys and girls at school. So a whole new generation is being raised, and brainwashed based on who knows what they are teaching them in these classrooms. So these groups, they always, also target kids because they know that their brain is fresh and they can teach them whatever. So we can do even so much better teaching them about peace and equality and justice.
Yeah, the symbolic realm that really underneath everything. Catalina Henao asked you, how can we contribute to pressure governments and international opinion leaders to help and protect women in war zones?
Well, I believe that's something that, you can, for example, reach out to your representatives in the government, talking to journalists and organizations, people around you, and making sure that, your own government, when they work in these war zones, and how they are supporting governments and armed groups in different countries, that they protect women and girls. There are always clear signs that conflict-related sexual violence is going to take place. And when we see these signs, it's really important to act, to prevent. But when we fail to prevent, then we have the responsibility to hold perpetrators accountable and help survivors to heal and recover and rebuild their lives. So that's something that we can do it by reaching out to our representatives and people that we know that have power, and little by little.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Our time is up. I'm sure that you have expanded our horizons in every way, not only personally and how much more resilient and courageous each of us can be, but also in how can we, push the governments and the media and the public to come into the game and unite, join forces and truly become activists, all of us. So I thank you so much. Please let's
Thank you so much.